Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast, and today I am joined by writer Kirstin Innes. Hello Kirstin.
Ooh.
And we're going to talk about your latest novel, Scabby Queen, which is out now. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about Scabby Queen, and for those who don't know, where the title comes from?
Yeah, so the title is a card game. I don't think it's exclusively Scottish, but it seems to be mostly Scottish people who are having a lot of memories relating to it. I think a few folk in the north of England are aware of it as well. And it's like you discard all the queens in the pack apart from it's usually the queen of clubs. And then the object of the game is to get rid of the queen of clubs and pass it on to your neighbour, and pass it on and pass it on, and not be the person left with the scabby queen at the end of the night. And the person who does get left with the scabby queen gets a rap over the knuckles with the whole deck. So it's a wee bit of a violent game.
I'd forgotten all about it. And I had this real flashback to my geography class. It was that specific. And guys up the back with bleeding knuckles because this cards had been, I went, oh yeah, that's right. So why did you choose that as a title?
It just seemed to fit the form of the book that I wanted to write, which was, essentially it's the story. The way I've been saying it is it's the story of the last 5 decades, told as one woman lived them.
Mm-hmm.
But this character, Clio Campbell, who's my central character, you never actually hear from her. The story's told from a variety of I think I've got about 20 narrators in there. I should really count. I should just be able to tell you how many I've got. A variety of different voices of people who knew her from childhood to her death at 51, and sometimes across those years as well. So yes, it seemed to fit the form that the Queen has always been passed on and passed around, and we get different viewpoints of her all the way.
So, I mean, you mentioned there that we don't hear directly from Clio herself, and she dies very early on in the novel. And that seems like a very brave thing to do. Were you always going to have that as the beginning?
Yeah. It always, it just always seemed to make sense to me that this is what would happen. I heard about a case in my wider circle of acquaintance where somebody took their own life and they left their body in their flat, knowing presumably that the person who would find it would be their flatmate. And I couldn't, that kind of stuck with me in the way that these wee kind of, I don't want to say nugget about something so personal, but it became a little bit of grit in the book for me, that idea of somebody, that final kind of act of selfishness, and what sort of state you'd have to be in to get to that at the end of your life. But I also, I was also really interested in the idea of somebody who had really intense short-term relationships. I don't just mean sexual relationships, and then kind of blew them up and moved on to the next thing. I'd known a few people like that in my life, and it just seemed to be to tell the story from the points of view of all the people of that person along the way seemed to be an interesting way of approaching it. So yeah.
Were you ever going to have Clio as one of the voices, or was it always going to be these people?
But what's interesting for me, what has been interesting for me as I pulled this together, was the idea of somebody, how much you can know about somebody, how much can a person be known without ever actually kind of being directly within them. I mean, it's mostly third person narrative, but third person through one narrator each chapter, one distinct narrator, and never Clio. And I wanted to keep her back a bit from the readership. I wanted to, I say the audience because she was a pop star, and a sort of a minor celebrity, amongst other reasons, her notoriety. And so I thought that it would kind of mirror the relationship we have with people where, with famous people, or famous people, where you don't know them, but you feel like you relate to them, but you never actually get inside their head. You never actually have a clear idea of who that person was. So yeah, that just kind of came from that, really.
She is a quite incredible character and really kind of multifaceted. And then I was starting to think that's probably because we're getting all these different versions of her from all
Yeah.
these different characters. It would be interesting for anyone, I think, to have so many different people kind of remembering them in that way.
Mm.
How did you come up with all the different characters? How did you do that?
Just it, I kind of I wrote I've had another chat with Ali about this for a different publication, and I was saying to you then, so I'm conscious of repeating myself to you. But I wrote the book around around 2 pregnancies and caring for a young child, and I finished it just before my second baby was born. Any tiny little nugget or idea I wanted to create had to become a character who would kind of fit into, you see. But also I didn't have, I'm actually amazed the whole thing holds together. I just didn't have the time to pursue one gigantic, one person's narrative as such. Each chapter is about 5,000 or 6,000 words, which seemed to be the perfect amount to kind of write in the amounts of the little bits of time that I had. So it's all just kind of sewn together like a patchwork quilt at the end. Oh no, that makes it sound a bit more random than it was. I was working away the whole time at Clio's life story. I had so many charts about what she was doing at various points along the way. But all the things that would interest me, that would usually possibly become ideas for other stories, or I usually start with an idea of a voice, an idea of a narrator. Right. Anytime I just grabbed them and wove them in, tried to work out how this person would know Clio, and it just sort of opened out that way.
Because the stories are seamless and they come in and they go out and it's at different stages. And you were saying you didn't have perhaps as much time as you would have liked. Mm-hmm. What did you have a intense editing process, or like checking that, this fits after that event, or any of that stuff?
Yes, I did do a lot of that. I have I've used up entire A4 pads trying to work out the timelines and work out the way that things go around. And I did a lot of colour coding. I love a bit of colour coding. Right. I'm mentoring kind of emergent writers at the moment, a couple of emergent novelists, and I always tell them, right, the first thing is to get off the laptop screen, get a gigantic, like an A1 or an A2 pad and a packet of felt tip pens, and just see where it can take you. It looks like a serial killer's kind of, or a case to catch a serial killer's kind of mind. But yeah, so I had charts and things, and I worked out which order everything needed to kind of go in. But I kind of did that afterwards, and I'd really been putting the process together along the way, because obviously you get glimpses of other characters, of some of the other narrators in other narrators' stories. And then there's also I've always liked the sort of story that reveals itself to you non-linearly and slowly, and you have to go back and fill in the gaps. So at one point Clio has a kind of a disastrous one-night stand, and she seems to be losing her mojo, and she seems to be pretty down, and you find out she's wearing cowboy boots. She's wearing cowboy boots at the time, and then a few chapters later it goes back to where she got those cowboy boots from and why that might have affected her mood at that point. And then I tried to kind of build this together. Yeah, I mean, I've been downplaying it because it really did come together very quickly, but it was kind of editing as I went. There were a few characters that have been cut out either before I submitted the manuscript. 3 of them got cut out before I submitted the manuscript, and then another 2 in post-production and when working with my editor and my publisher.
The novel takes on a lot of historical and political events. They seem to kind of almost bookmark how the novel unfolds. Was that always something that you wanted to do as well?
It was one of those things that it was always going to be a novel about politics, and I thought at first that my interest was going to be a lot more to do with I was kind of thinking I always wanted to write about working class women in Scottish politics,
right,
and their places, and working class women in the left and on the left, and their position generally. I thought I was going to look at different elements than I did. It just seemed to fit that the poll tax riots are when Clio gets her kind of 15 minutes of fame, or her first 15 minutes of fame, and she has a one-hit wonder, a sort of a defiant kind of anti-poll tax song that makes it big. She gets onto Top of the Pops and that sort of thing. And I knew in order to make that kind of tell the story that I wanted to, she needed to be a young woman in the music industry at that time. So working out the dates, I also worked out that possibly she would have been a kind of a teenager around about the miners' strike, and so that started to feed in as well. And then everything else just kind of fell in place from there. I was having to think about how she would have reacted to various events along the way. You know, a kind of the big kind of protests like the anti-Iraq war protest or Make Poverty History of the noughties, and how those might have seemed to somebody who was, you know, who kind of grew up in solidarity, who was kind of schooled in a much more localized fight, and maybe whose first experience, or whose second big formative experience of a political fight was something like the poll tax that was actually positive, was a positive experience. How that would have impacted your idea of activism as it went on, and as maybe the causes that this person got involved with didn't have such positive outcomes necessarily. The poll tax for me was a big thing as well. I'm 12 years younger than Clio, but so I was 9 or 10, and I remember being taken on anti-poll tax demos, and really kind of really being it was the first time that I understood that kind of, I mean, I didn't understand the complete intricacies of the poll tax, but I understood the impact, the injustice, and it made an impact on me. So it made a bit of sense from that point of view to really start with 1990, and kind of take it from there and see what she would have got involved in. She got involved in everything, did Clio. She was up for a scrap, so she was.
That's the thing, it does seem to come from her character. It's like, so what would this character be angered by and be interested in, rather than fitting her, you know, a character in around the events. It's like, no, this makes complete sense, that this is exactly what she would be angered by or enthused by, or all of those things.
I had chapters where she was taking on, one of the ones that got discarded early on was she was going to be involved in a kind of thinly disguised egg land reform, taking on the corrupt landlord, sort of working for the land reform movement and that sort of thing. But I just couldn't quite make it fit. That's sort of hinted at that she's been involved in that sort of thing as well. But yeah.
So was this going to be a bit, I say this because it's here and people can see it. Was this going to be a bigger book than it is? Because, you know, it's a good book to read.
Yeah, it's I think we cut about 20,000 words out. It was over 150,000 words. They tend to ask you not to go over. This is interesting, actually. Publishing, they prefer books to stay under 120,000 words, because anything else, the German translation rights you lose, because in German, obviously, words are so much longer, and you know, and have to, you know, so the page count goes up and up. I hadn't realised that until my agent and I were having a conversation about whether it was worth cutting a lot of the book just for that. But yeah, we cut. Yeah, it was over 150,000. I think it's about 140,000 now. So we cut about 20.
And is that a difficult thing to do, or were you in the process that, no, the main thing is to get this book out now? So
yep, absolutely. I am. I'm not very precious about my writing. I'm quite. I think I'd like to say I'm quite easy to edit. Maybe my editors would have a different opinion, but yeah, I can generally tell when somebody's making a good point, and if I can't argue why a bit needs to stay in, convincing myself, then they're probably right.
When did you start writing the book? Because it does seem incredibly current. I mean, even on like reading the news on a daily basis, there's stuff coming out, whether it's the treatment and abuse of women in show business, for want of a better term, show business. And even today, the Caroline Flack news story that came out, it does, as I say, it seems very much off the now.
Yeah, I started writing in started writing in 2015. But then it kind of, I did a wee bit of writing on it in 2015 till about October, because I worked full time up until March, then had a baby. So then there was a bit of a gap. So I didn't do anything at all during 2016, but 2016 I think is the most formative year for it, because there was Brexit for a start, the Brexit vote that really made me, I kind of shut down. My partner found it quite frustrating because we've both always been very politically aware and politically active. And I had a new baby, and I was just so I repulsed at what had happened and what was happening. I came off Twitter. I stopped paying attention to the news, or so it seemed. But it was all feeding in. This was the way I was responding to it, was kind of constructing a framework by which I could write a novel, reacting to a lot of it. The other thing that happened in 2016 is that was the year of all the celebrity deaths. It started with Whay, ended with Carrie Fisher, and it was the Carrie Fisher one that really also impacted on Clio. That's sort of when I decided to make Clio a kind of a minor celebrity, because I was kind of interested in the way that Carrie Fisher had been very, very, very visible throughout 2016, because the new Star Wars film had come out and her book had come out. She'd revealed she'd had an affair with Harrison Ford, and then she died right at the end of it. And she'd been getting so much abuse. She'd been very anti-Trump, and people had been tearing her down because she dared to be an older woman. She wasn't Princess Leia. She wasn't a skinny teenager anymore, and she had opinions, and she was sometimes a bit manic on Twitter, the way she presented those opinions, possibly. But she was angry. She was an angry woman, and she came in for so much abuse, and then she died, and it was like she'd been sainted. Nobody had ever said a bad word about her. And I was really, I just thought that really shows you, doesn't it? We just like to keep our female celebrities, even, I was going to say national treasure, but I mean kind of worldwide treasures, in nice little boxes where they're either young and pretty, or, not angry, or dead. That really played into the way that, because the book's intercut with a lot of media chat with Clio as well. But the Me Too movement was 2017, and that definitely fed in too. Right. So there's a couple of chapters in there that I was writing as that was all playing out, and they just kind of became my response to it all, I think. So yeah. Sorry, that was a really long way round answering your question.
It's interesting that you mentioned Carrie Fisher, because there are any real life person. Do you think it's helpful for people to kind of speculate about who characters may be based on? Because I mean, I think you can't avoid it in some ways.
Oh, in this one, yeah. Well, I'm interested to find it. I mean, I've been quite clear. There's a character called Gogsy Duke. And a couple of reviews have said a thinly disguised Tommy Sheridan. And I'd actually tried to make him, a wee bit different from that. Certainly he's got that kind of firebrand kind of working class who comes to kind of prominence in the poll tax protests. But I was kind of imagining what would happen to somebody like that if they became a Labour politician immediately before Tony Blair, and kind of where that went in a, because the book does kind of go all the way up to, actually goes up to 2020, but all the way up to 2018, so it takes in the referendum and everything as well. So yeah, Gogsy Duke was only very thinly based on Tommy Sheridan, right. And that, I did read, I've read a couple of books about the poll tax movements and the way that, you know, they were organised in Scotland, certainly, and obviously you can't ignore a figure like Tommy Sheridan there.
No.
But I did try and kind of, he makes a wee line cameo, a 2-line cameo, just Tommy Sheridan. He kind of introduces Clio at a poll tax rally when she's about to sing her big song, because I wanted it to kind of, I wanted these people to sort of exist side by side. Nobody's a thinly drawn kind of version, and a few people have said Eddie Reader for Clio as well. And while there was definitely one particular Eddie Reader influence, which is that I remember her when I was a really little girl going on Top of the Pops doing Perfect, when she was in Fairground Attraction, and she couldn't hide the fact that she thought this was ridiculous, and she stopped miming and she just sat there laughing in front of the microphone and pulling funny faces. And for me, that was a bit of a, oh, what are you doing kind of moment. So, you know, that she's got red hair and she's Scottish. So Clio uses her time on Top of the Pops to protest the poll tax instead. But yeah, apart from that, there's not that much similarity, but I was kind of aware of it. So again, Eddie Reader makes a 1 line cameo in the book as well, just to say this is not Eddie Reader. Clio is very, very much her own person. Carrie Fisher possibly played in most strongly, but yeah.
Because you do get Cleo's life almost from the very beginning, obviously to the end and kind of beyond, really. That's quite a big time span to deal with. Was that a challenge in itself? You know, because sometimes people look, oh, here's a crazy, you know, a weekend or a year in the life off or whatever, but to do the full span is quite an undertaking.
It is, but there's lots of chunks missing, partly deliberately and partly because I realised at some point, listen, you cannot know this whole woman's life. You can't include, you're already at, you know, 150,000 words, you need to stop. I've got a dim idea of what she might have been doing at various points, but so, you know, in order to keep her on. I mean, there's, yeah, I don't know. To be honest, it didn't feel challenging writing this book. It was an absolute joy. I love it so much, and it just kind of, it came kind of bursting out of me. That my first novel felt like a slog towards the end, to be honest. I've done so much research for it and worried for years about whether I had the right to tell this story, or whether I was a good enough writer to do it, or, you know, in huge crises. This one just kind of, maybe I just didn't have the time to doubt myself that much. It just kind of came bubbling out. So yeah, I didn't necessarily see it as a challenge. I didn't sit down with an idea and think, right, here's how I am going to, this is what I am going to do. It just all kind of came as I was writing and just seemed to kind of patchwork itself together like that.
In some ways, did you see it as almost, not an escape, that's the wrong word, but as you've got all the new experiences with the kids and family and all that stuff, and was the book something that you could almost escape into yourself?
Yeah, very, very much so. It's, yeah, just those little bits of time when somebody else had the baby and I was just there and able to write. I did a lot of, I live out in the countryside, and I did a lot just whenever my baby needed to be walked to sleep for his first year. So I just walked for miles and miles and miles with this baby in a sling, making notes on my phone, or a little voice note if something came to me, and I was just kind of hardly seeing anybody except the odd dog walker staring up at big sky or a loch or being in a wood. And yeah, and then my brain just kind of felt free to sort of go where it wanted to, I think. So yeah, I had a lot of notes on my phone to kind of work from when I came to sort of coming back to writing. But I mean, it really did just all come out so very quickly compared to the last one. It's twice as long as the last one. Mm-hmm. It took me half the time and was written around, you know, a lot of giant things. But yeah, an escape, just a way of being political and being creative again, I think.
Yeah.
This was it. So my partner had been becoming a little bit frustrated with what he felt was my sort of complete disengagement. I really felt like I had blinkers on, and then he read the manuscript and he went, oh, that's where you were.
Yeah, I get it. I do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, writing it, did you kind of reflect on your own past and the people that you've shared it with in the way that they do with Clio?
A little bit. Yeah, there were a couple of chapters that I'd sort of played around with that ended up cut, actually. But yeah, I was thinking there were a few sort of times where I was thinking, right, you know, can I think of it instances in my past where, you know, something might have happened. There was I mean, there was a girl I'd known when I was a teenager, and she died quite tragically, and it was awful. And we'd been very good friends, and she'd stolen my boyfriend when we were 15. And a lot of those feelings kind of played into it a little bit. And then I thought, no, I think this is time to step back from that. There was a character that seemed very much from that point of view, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna take that bit out. But you know, possibly that kind of came into play a little bit when I was thinking about how, I don't know, the idea that you have of somebody when you're very young can be very different from the idea of who that person went on to be or ever was. But then that could be as true of people you meet at any point in your life, to be honest.
Yeah.
I really wanted to try and give a sense of each of these characters, each of my narrators. It has their own world, has their own thing going on, and you know, how that would impact on how they perceive this person as well, at the various times that they meet her.
So it does say quite a bit about the notion of celebrity, because you say Clio has a hit early on, and she, in some ways, you know, she's not defined by it. She refuses to let that define her. But for other people, she's still able to use that one hit, as you say, to help and influence. I mean, she's still attending rallies later on, and really that's where her fame came from. What did you want to say about the kind of nature of fame or celebrity?
I don't know that I necessarily set out to make a statement about fame or celebrity. It just seemed like this was an interesting, in fact, it seemed like using a celebrity character who had minor fame but could kind of leverage that in various ways if she wanted to, seemed like an interesting way to comment more on the social issues that I was kind of looking at.
Yeah, I mean,
the way that a celebrity will automatically be able to command an audience, or you know, even a very, very minor one whose day has been and gone. There's still something about this idea of celebrity and noteworthiness that you know, you see quite early on. The editor of a newspaper that one of the characters works at has received a tip off about her suicide, and from the police, and is kind of you know, they see the sort of the muckraking nature of the press coming out, this sort of idea of, is it in the public interest when the person has not really been a public figure for a few years, that kind of idea. That was a very roundabout, not making sense answer, sorry.
Well, it does actually, because you know, you look at the media quite a lot, as you say. You've got excerpts from magazines and things like that, and they kind of show the initial reaction, and then when she makes an album later on, which is kind of more traditional, the reaction to that. So it's not traditional because it's got other influences. It's got a cross influence. And then later, after people are reflecting on her in the media, it's, as you say about Carrie Fisher, it's much more generous than they were at the time. It's a kind of rewriting of their own history, of their own publications.
Yeah. One of the journalists, I suppose he's a character. You only ever read his work. He doesn't have a voice. But yeah, one of the journalist characters, kind of, who has savaged her when she was alive and daring to try something different. You know, kind of after her death, sort of says, "Oh yes, I probably." You know, it's well worth a listen to that album. I said it was disgusting nonsense at the time, or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's that real get out clause about it's worth revisiting, you know, that kind of, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the without giving anything away at all, but the final chapter was so moving. I mean, it kind of hit me straight between the eyes, I have to say. Were you always going to end that way, or did you have an ending in mind, put it that way?
I wrote that. I don't write linearly. Yeah, as you might have guessed, I wrote that chapter really, really early on. It was one of the first.
Yeah.
It just came. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where the voice came from, but it just seemed to make sense once everything had fallen into place about where Clio kind of came from and what might have been a big moment in her early years relating to the miners' strikes. That whole chapter, I wrote it in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, without even looking up. I've changed very little about it, apart from, it was originally, that chapter was originally written as a kind of conversation from the point of view of, I can't give too much away about that
No,
chapter.
no. And you shouldn't.
But no, I had that as an end point from very early on, so I always knew where the book was going to end. There were certain other things that kind of happened towards the end that took me by surprise. But again, I don't want to give too much away about it. But yeah, there were certain other twists and turns that happened towards the end of the book that I suddenly occurred to me. Oh, I might do that. Actually, I'll tell you when we're not recording.
I think though, for people who read rather than write, that's always a surprise to hear, that writers themselves are surprised at the twists and turns that come their way. I mean, how does that practically, how does that work? You say, oh, I didn't know we would be, meeting that person or walking down that street. Is that kind of what it's like?
No, not quite that. It's more just a kind of the way the jigsaw puzzle pieces fall into place, and you suddenly realise, oh, of course she's done this. Of course, that's why she's done something. Of course, this is what's happened. And then you kind of go back and sort of check that everything makes sense from that point of view as well. And but yeah, that ending, I'm quite chuffed with. I didn't even make the connection. Ulysses was actually is a really famous favorite book of mine.
Right.
But I haven't read it for quite a while. I did a lot about it when I was a postgrad at uni, and I was going out with a boy who wrote his undergrad dissertation on it at university. And then he contacted me after he'd read it, and he went, Molly Bloom. Right at the end. Of course it was. So it's that kind of big difference in the end, and that's obviously where I got it from without realizing.
Without realizing it.
Yeah.
So it should be the kind of run up to Edinburgh Book Festival at the moment. Clearly, it's not. How have you had to adjust to having a book published at this odd time?
Well, first of all, it was supposed to be published on April the 30th, and then got put back. All the warehouses were closed. So my publisher didn't want to do it just as an ebook first of all, so they put it back to July the 23rd. It's been interesting, hasn't it? I mean, to be honest, I quite like the online opportunities that have come up. That's been quite good. I got to have a very, very self-indulgent fake out book launch on Twitter for the original launch date, where I just basically got drunk in front of Twitter with them, answered some questions, wore some lipstick. It's been interesting. I mean, for me as well, because this book is published by a much bigger publisher than my first. I mean, much bigger. So in terms of the attention, it's been really strange. And then Nicola Sturgeon got hold of a copy, and after and Nicola Sturgeon tweeted about it, and then suddenly, I mean, my goodness, the Sturgeon effect was strange. And that's this is all. Does that have anything to do with COVID? I don't know. Would that have happened just anyway? It does feel frustrating in that I would like to. When I planned this, when we were talking about this year, my partner and I, he was saying, well, what I'm going to do, because his work usually he usually tours, he usually performs. And so he was saying, well, this year I'm not going to do that, and you're going to do that. So you can get your tours of festivals in, and I was imagining doing bookshop events up and down the country. I do always think that you need to be. When I was a journalist, I interviewed A.L. Kennedy, And she said what she does is she just never stops touring, because you have to physically put the book into your reader's hands, basically, to get it out there and maintain a readership. So I do worry a wee bit about that. But yeah, it's just odd times, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so who knows? I mean, I've never had the First Minister tweet about my book before, the week before it came out, and suddenly zoom up the Amazon charts. I've never had a book out on a big publisher before, so I'm not sure what is different and isn't.
Yeah.
I'll be.
I guess you can only just take how it is.
Yeah. I am sad that I'm not getting to do this one at the Edinburgh Book Festival. I mean, I'll be doing it as part of the Edinburgh Book Festival from right this spot. But I don't know. I love the Edinburgh Book Festival because I grew up in Edinburgh, and when I was a wee girl, actually, PD James was opening it, and she pulled me out of the crowd to help her cut the ribbon of either the first or the second one. You need to ask my mum, but yeah, that's like a big story. So for me, anything to do with the Edinburgh Book Festival, it was always just this magical place for me as a kid. So I'm sad that I won't get to be there.
Yeah. I just remembered there's a scene in the book at the Edinburgh Book Festival, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, there is. I was really hoping to read that scene at the Edinburgh Book Festival. Yeah, there is. Yeah, that was one I wrote quite late on as well.
And as you say, it's been out for a week now, a bit more, 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks today.
And as far as I can tell, it's been very well received, and rightly so. Are you happy with how people are reacting to it? Do you think people get it?
Yes, yeah. It's been wonderful, actually. It's been bad because I'm having to be back on Twitter a bit more to kind of keep promoting it. I don't really like being on Twitter.
And it's changed a lot. If you've been off it for that amount of time, I think it's changed a lot. It's not the energy.
I had it blocked apart from between 9 and 10 at night, but now I'm back on, but apart from that, and my obsessive need to search Scabby Queen on Twitter every half an hour or something, there's just so many people saying lovely things about it, which is wonderful, and people are reacting to it so thoughtfully and emotionally, and the main thing that's coming back, if I can toot my own trumpet for a wee bit, is that people say that the characters feel real. And that's the most important thing for me, because much as we talk about Clio, it's the supporting characters, the narrative voiced characters, the point of view characters that my sort of emotions and reactions that I'm kind of emotionally involved with. Clio always remains quite unknowable to me as well, whereas some of the point of view characters are very, very dear to me indeed. So it's nice to find people loving them and reacting to them.
And they really do stand out. I think, each one, as you say, is absolutely believable, has their own voice. That's kind of why I asked how you came up with them at the beginning, because it does seem you've almost written a little backstory, a little, these characters very, very well.
Yeah. Well, everything, it just, I've said this before, but I just, I feel the need to, a character's always got to feel 3D to me.
Yes, sure.
As I'm writing them, I'm not, it's weird because Muriel Spark is one of my foremost influences on my writing, but what she does, her characters are almost always ciphers. They're always, she always points out to you that they're characters and she has written them, and she will move them around her chessboard as she sees fit. Whereas, for me, I need even the sort of the more negative characters, antagonists or whatever, particularly them, to feel like 3D rounded people. So I've got to kind of go round each of them and, sound them out and check that they do really feel real. But no, that means a lot to me that people are reacting that way to my characters, because much as the book is about, takes in all these great big political events, and it is definitely a political book. I don't think I can argue my way out of that one. But the important thing for me, what it's ultimately about, is just those little moments between people and what you find out about somebody in those moments, and what a person, how how people relate to each other or don't relate to each other. Yeah, because I kind of feel like when all kind of politics, all sort of political struggles and injustices and that kind of thing, it all comes down to empathy or a failure of empathy at some level. So yeah, and that's what I was kind of hoping to do, I guess.
Well, Kirstin, I think that's the perfect place to finish. Thank you so much for chatting to me today. I think it's a fantastic book, by the way, really fabulous. I was blown away by it when I read it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.